My name is Wright Morgan, uh, technically junior or second, named after my father, who was a native of Ohio but came west about 1920. No, earlier than that. He served in the Colorado Army National Guard from Colorado in World War I. He was a corporal. His father had been a private in the Spanish-American War and was with Colonel Roosevelt at San Juan Hill and all those good things. I went to the first 3 grades at East Street School in Trinidad, and then my family moved to Denver. And I basically grew up in North Denver. I went to a couple elementary schools. I don't even, Fairmont's one, and then Baker Junior High, and then Skinner Junior High. Now the 8th grade, my family moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico. So I did the 8th grade in Albuquerque. Then we came back to Denver and I did the 9th grade at Skinner, 10th grade at North Denver High, then went back to Albuquerque for the 11th grade, and we moved again, and I never got back to going to my senior year until I got out of the Army. And I finished at my senior year, and it was not a GED. I went 2 years at night at Venice Adult Evening High School in Los Angeles, California, in the Venice area of Los Angeles. Now, people, this is interesting. A lot of people hear all these names of towns out there, and they think that they're towns like Hollywood and Sherman Oaks and Northridge and all that. You know, those are all parts of the city of Los Angeles. Those are just neighborhoods like Val Verde and Globeville are parts of Denver. We're off the subject.
How did you get to New Orleans?
Oh, um, my mother and father had a very amicable separation when I was about 7 or 8 years of age. I think this is an interesting story. Um when my mother and father got their divorce in Denver District Court, I don't remember the year, in the late 1920s, early 1930s, somewhere around there. It was such an amicable divorce. They got their divorce decree on Friday afternoon, and they celebrated it by going out to Lakeside and dancing till dawn. It was friendly. It was just mutually agreed that they couldn't live together because my dad was an artist and he was temperamental to the extreme. And they got along wonderfully when they didn't live under the same roof. And I never was deprived um, of my father because he had a studio down at 17th and Curtis in Denver. And every Saturday, I'd be down there by 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'd sit around and watch him painting till finally, I guess I got on his nerves about uh, 10 o'clock, and he'd say, are there any good movies on at the ISIS Theater around the corner? Well, yes. And so he'd give me sometimes a whole quarter. Now, it was 15 cents to get into the movie, and that left me 10 cents to go to the drugstore across the street and have an ice cream soda. I had a very good relationship with my dad. Better after he and my mother separated. Because my dad was of Welsh ancestry, and like most Celtic peoples, he was explosive. The Irish are maybe more explosive than the Welsh, but not as much as the Scots. The Scots are a little calmer. My mother was of Norman English descent, and she was very quiet. She beat my dad every time. She let him rant and rave. When the dust settled, we did things Mom's way. But I was an only child for 20 years, and then my mother remarried, and I have a half brother. His father was Irish, and he lives out in California now. And we stay in pretty close touch. All right, December 7th, when war started?
1941. Where were you and what was your reaction?
I was living in New Orleans. It was a Sunday morning. I was single, and I decided to go downtown. Oh, I was home on leave, my first leave. And so I went downtown to the USO to get a cup of coffee and see if there were any nice looking young women down there. And I got out on Canal Street, and by gosh, people were running hither and yon. What the heck's going on? And somebody says, the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor. That's how I learned about it. That was a year before I went in the Army. What happened was I went down to enlist, and they told me that I was too far underweight. My eyes were not good enough, 20/40, and they thought that I had a disc or something slipped slightly in my back. They said, you'll never go in the service. A year later, they were taking anybody that had a pulse.
Did you enlist or were you drafted?
I tried to enlist, and they turned me down. And actually, have you heard of people that try to use influence and pull to keep from serving? I had to use influence and pull to get into the Army. Every time I went down, they turned me down for physical reasons. But I had just turned 21, and I became eligible to join a Masonic Lodge. And two of the three members of my draft board were lodge brothers. And I said, damn it, I'm getting sick of this. I go down and try to enlist, and they won't take me. And I don't know how they did it, but a week later, I got a draft notice, and I went down, and for some reason, mysterious, I don't know, I didn't have to go through the regular line for examinations. They brought me to a special doctor, and he gave me about a 3-minute examination and said I'm okay. So I had to use influence to get into the Army.
That's a first.
No, I don't think it is. I think there were a lot of guys like me. And I might tell you, I met my first wife at that USO. Another Sunday, I went over there. And as I started to go upstairs, the USO was on the second floor. I saw this cute little gal, and boy, she had a nice figure, and I was about 5 paces behind her going up, and I enjoyed watching her walk up the stairs, and I thought she was cute. And so when we got up to the second floor, there was one bench or sofa, about the size of that one, occupied by 4 or 5 sailors, male sailors. And she was a wave. And she went over and sat down with the male sailors. Well, I really thought she was attractive. So I went in, and I found a chair, just sort of like they're sitting there. I was about right over here.
Hold on, you're moving way out of the frame there. I wouldn't
All right.
try to adjust.
Anyhow, I saw her sitting over there, and I just sat there, and I just sort of looked at her with a very faint smile on my face. Finally, she couldn't stand it any longer. She came over, and she introduced herself, and I said, well, this is a USO. I said, would you like to maybe go, do you know anything about New Orleans? No, she'd just been transferred there as a Navy wave, the Naval Air Station in Algiers. She said, no. I said, would you like me to show you the town? I mean, what else? So we spent the rest of the afternoon riding the bus and going to different nice places there, Audubon Park and so on and so forth. And to make a long story short, I had 3 more days left in my leave, and we spent those 3 days together. And I went back to camp, And we were later, several months later, uh, she got transferred to a naval air station in Mobile, Alabama, and I got sent to Fort Benning. And so we were able to, she came over and we were married at the main post chapel at Fort Benning by an Episcopal chaplain who had partaken most liberally of the sacramental wine. In fact, but he got through it. And then from Fort Benning, I went to Fort Dix, and at Fort Benning, I went to radio school. I was a radio operator, and that's when I made Model T corporal. I had been corporal twice before. I served in World War II, and I made corporal. Well, actually, I made corporal 3 times. There were some little misunderstandings along the way. And I spent my first year in the Army. I went in from Louisiana, New Orleans. And my first year I spent at a training camp outside of Little Rock, Arkansas. What happened was we had a 6 weeks basic training cycle. Now you're supposed to take a civilian that doesn't know his left foot from his right foot and in 6 weeks turn him into a soldier. But that's all the time they had. So about the 5th week, the company commander called me in and he said, I think you're showing some promise. He said, I'm going to keep you back and put you in the cadre here. He says, as an instructor. Now, if you can imagine the irony, 6 weeks out of civilian life, and I'm an instructor to teach these other guys how to be a soldier. And it worked out very well. I became an instructor, but slick sleeve, buck private, no promotions. I was there for a year. And then
What year
came,
was this?
I went in the Army in November of 1942. So this would be the year of 1943. Then after about a year, they started shipping them out here and there. And most of the people in that training camp, by the way, it was called Branch Immaterial Replacement Training Center. The reason it branch immaterial is these are people, they don't know where they're going to send you. They give you basic training, and some may go to artillery and some to armored force and so on and so on. That's why it's branch immaterial. Well, I was lucky enough, and I mean this, I was lucky enough to go into the infantry. I wanted to be in the infantry. Most people didn't. But I'd heard stories my dad and my grandfather had told me about the infantry, and that's where I thought that, and I still believe it, all the other arms of service are there for the purpose of supporting the infantrymen. We need the Navy, we call them the seagoing taxi cab, and the Air Force. I can tell you that in Normandy, well, all across France, we had air supremacy, and that's how we were able to proceed so rapidly, because we owned the air, and it was very rare that we would be strafed by a German fighter plane. Once in a while, but very rarely. Well, after a year at Little Rock, Arkansas, at Camp Joseph T. Robinson, it was named after a United States Senator from Arkansas. I spent a year there, and guys got shipped off to the Pacific and everywhere. And one day they came and it got about 20 of us, and we were shipped to the 80th Infantry Division, and we went to Camp Forest, Tennessee. And I thought that was a wonderful place. It was a lot like Colorado. It's mountain. And so we spent a considerable amount of time doing maneuvers there at Camp Forest. And then they sent us to a real garden spot called Mesa, Arizona. It's sand. And that's all it is sand. And we had pyramidal tents, which was nice, and we had cots inside the tents. And of course, in those days, everybody smoked. And I used to have a cigarette at night and get through, just push it down into the sand right off by my cot. After a little while at the camp at Mesa, Arizona, they all of a sudden grabbed us up, and I spent, I think it was about 5 days and nights, riding a troop train from Mesa, Arizona, clear back to the East Coast to Port of Embarkation. It was then called Camp Dix. It's now Fort Dix. I felt I was very lucky that I think something historic happened. Our entire division, men, equipment, tanks, everything, went over on one ship. I went over on the Queen Mary. And since we were in Regimental Headquarters Company, we were lucky enough to get bunks on the main deck. In fact, what they did, they took the library and converted it. And there were 5 bunks high in the library. But it was a lot better than being down in the hold. We went across the Atlantic without escort because we were fast, faster than any German submarine. And we went way north, damn near into iceberg country, and went to England, spent a month there getting ready for D-Day. And although my 4 battle stars include Normandy, the Battle of the Bulge, Rhineland, and Central Europe, I was obviously not in the first wave at Normandy, or I wouldn't be here. But when we debarked from the little ship that took us across the channel, and choppy and all hell, when we were debarking, the perimeter at Normandy, where we landed, St. Mary Église, which means Holy Mother Church in French, there was a 6-mile perimeter, 6 miles deep and 6 miles wide. As we were debarking, all of a sudden, Patton's men just busted through. We had the 4th Armored Division as our armored unit. I don't know if you know the setup. They had what they call a triangular setup. 1 armored division accompanied by 2 infantry divisions. So the 4th Armored Division, and my division was the 80th Infantry, as you see from the trophy case. In fact, I wish I had it to point out a couple of things.
We'll be able to go back and get that. Just talk about it and then we'll go.
It's called a Blue Ridge Division because the shoulder patch is 3 blue mountains on a shield. And when we broke out, believe it or not, it took us 3 days and 3 nights to catch up with the front. We busted out of St. Mary Église, and we went a third of the way across France to Angers on the Loire River. It's humorous to look back on it. We were going so fast, and we we cut off 3 German armies, and as we were coming along, they just threw down their arms, put their hands on their heads, and says, "Kamerad." And this is really humorous. We would tell them, "We don't have room for you. Go back there and find somebody to surrender to." Well, they had nowhere to go. And we ended up at Strasbourg, which is right on the French-German-Swiss border.
Okay. Jumping back, one capture the Germans that way? Did you take their arms and then just send them back?
They threw them down. They knew better. They just threw them down, put their hands in their heads. But you know, I I have a flair for languages, and I picked up some German when I was there, and I think most American soldiers, combat soldiers, would tell you that we very quickly recognized they were just guys like us. They were drafted. Most of them privately hated Hitler, but they were scared to death because there were two distinct groups of German soldiers. There were the Wehrmacht, which is the regular army, and then the SS divisions. Now, they were bastards incarnate. I remember we captured one little French village in Alsace, and had a population of maybe 400. What the Germans did, they took everybody, old men and women and children, because the able-bodied men were all off fighting, and they took them in the village square. They lined them up and just machine gunned the whole bunch of them. Now, if you think that isn't a traumatic situation, come into the village, and we saw what they had done. And I think episodes like that are what really infuriated the average American GI. They didn't, there was a point there where they didn't have the facilities to handle prisoners, so they were just shooting them.
Actually, I think one of the people we talked to might have been the same guy, alluded to that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so...
Well, they were desperate. They knew they were losing. And you got to give them credit. They didn't give up. I admire their tenacity. I don't know if you've heard this from anyone else, but I'll tell you that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was about as universally despised by the men in my outfit as any human being I can think of. And why? Because in September, when we were at Strasbourg, we had crossed the Rhine River, and General Patton told General Eisenhower, we can be in Berlin in 3 weeks. And General Patton was overruled by Eisenhower at the direct order of Franklin Roosevelt, who had made a dirty, rotten deal with Stalin not to, that the Russians could take Berlin, or at least be there first. We could have had Berlin 6 or 7 months before the war ended if it hadn't been for that damn Roosevelt. I hated him. While we were at Strasbourg, after Roosevelt pulled us back, all of a sudden the bulge broke loose. And our division, the 80th Infantry Division, along with the 35th and the 4th Armored, we spent 4 or 5 days going from Strasbourg way down south, clear up to Luxembourg. And I was in the Battle of the Bulge at Luxembourg. And then we again crossed the Rhine, only this time we stayed across. I went to...
I was going to ask you one quick question there.
Go ahead.
Most people don't realize that the Americans were across the Rhine that early in the war. They always heard about going across in the spring of 45.
Well, that's because Roosevelt hushed it up. They didn't want to...
Did you actually get across?
Oh, yes. I was 20 miles across. When, as I say, Patton could have won the damn war. But you must understand about Roosevelt, he was practically on his deathbed. When he had that last meeting with Stalin at Yalta, I don't think he was in possession of his faculties. And it's unfortunate. But you know, in the history of warfare, most of the great battles, most of the victories and the defeats are the result of military blunders. There's a nice program on History Channel. And it's sad, but that's what happens. All right, ask another question.
Okay, you were with Patton. You've talked about Patton.
Greatest guy, I worship the guy.
Okay, tell us.
I only met him once. Um, I was, this happened to be one of the times when I was a corporal. And I was sent out at a crossroad, and my job was to send this unit this way and that unit that way at the crossroad. And I was sitting there with my Jeep, and all of a sudden, this Jeep comes storming up, and there was a red plate on the front with 3 silver stars on it, Lieutenant General George S. Patton. I don't know what was on his mind, but he come roaring up, and he says, "Corporal, get that goddamn Jeep the hell out of here, and I mean now." And I said, "Yes, sir," and I went. I don't know why he didn't want me there. But, you know, his philosophy, he was an old cavalryman. His philosophy was that it's a lot harder to hit a moving target than one sitting still. And the reason the Third Army under Patton had less casualties than the First or the Fifth or the Seventh Armies was because they sat still. That was why we criticized the British Montgomery so much. He was too cautious. He didn't want to move till he was sure he had every last paperclip there. And Patton didn't believe in that. And Patton believed in giving the individual soldier, from his colonels to his captains to his sergeants down to the private, credit for using their own American initiative, because Americans are damn good at improvising. And that's what we did. When we captured that German half-track, and I made it my radio, made it the Radio Shack. It was a hell of a lot better having my radio inside a half-track, which was protected, instead of on a Jeep where you could be picked off. And along the way, the French people were very generous to us. Every little town we went in, they came out with bottles of wine and hams. Now, hams were very precious. Those people, and especially in Luxembourg, they had been saving up their goodies all during those 4 years of darkness under the Nazis. They knew the Americans were going to come. They told us that. And in Luxembourg, I was there on my birthday, January 29th, 1944. And the townspeople had been saving their sugar and their flour, waiting for the Americans to come, and they threw a big party for us. We got, you know, a galvanized wash tub looks like, don't you? All right, we had several of those, and we provided the ice, because we had machines for making ice, and the canned grapefruit juice, and the Luxembourgers provided their local drink. It's called Mirabelle, but it's White Lightning. And so they poured bottles of that, and we had wash tub full of beverages, and we had a party. And they baked a birthday cake for myself and my squad leader, Sergeant Hootie, who was killed later on. And I thought it was really touching. Oh, and one of the Luxembourgers showed me one of the large greenbacks from World War I that an American soldier had given him, and the American soldiers, I guess a squad, had signed their name on this greenback and given it to this Luxembourger. So he brought it out, and he asked if we'd sign it. There was still some room. So we signed this World War I greenback and gave it to the Luxembourger. They were wonderful people. Their national anthem, if that's what it really is, has one phrase I remember. The Luxembourgers speak a dialect of German. And in this song that they sang was, "Wir nimmer Preußen sein," we will never be Prussians. They hated the Prussians. And you know, that's interesting. In Germany, if you know your history, northern Germany uh, is Prussian dominated. They are Lutherans, they're Protestants. Southern Germany, Bavaria, going into Austria, they're Catholic. And there's just as much difference in their personality as day and night. The Bavarians are fun-loving people, warm-hearted. They love Oktoberfest. Okay, I've run out of steam now. Ask me something else.
Okay, we're going back.
Well, when we went up to the Battle of the Bulge, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Battle of the Bulge. I remember towns there, three that sounded almost like there was one called Heiderscheid, another one called Buderscheid. I can't remember the third one. Anyhow, in Luxembourg, the people were so solidly behind us, and they had been fighting a guerrilla warfare all through the years. They knew how to sabotage. They could blow up railroad tracks and blow up bridges and things. And when we got there, we were so welcomed. Yeah, it's really sort of touching the way they treated us. And of course, I was only, when we broke out of Luxembourg and went into Germany, I was in Kaiserslautern and crossed the Fulda River in a little town called Fulda, and that's where I was wounded and came home. So I don't know what happened personally after that.
What kind of wound and what kind of situation?
It's hard to believe. As I was in what's the INR platoon, the Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon of Headquarters Company of the 319th Infantry Regiment. We were basically glorified scouts. Our job was either on foot patrol or motorized to go out ahead of the troops and find out where the Germans were. And there was a sort of a unofficial agreement, or anyhow it came about that way. We didn't shoot at the German scouts when they were out, and they didn't shoot at our scouts. Good reason. If we saw a German patrol going along there, and if we started shooting at it, before you know it, both sides would be dropping artillery in on us. So being a scout was really one of the safest things to be, believe it or not.
That's amazing. So how'd you get wounded?
Oh, yes. Well, we were going along. There were 3 jeeps of us. The lieutenant and his driver were in the first jeep. Sergeant Hootie, a squad leader, was in the second jeep, and me being a Model T corporal, naturally I got the rear end. And as we came around, we were on a beautiful road in Germany, a lot like Colorado. It reminded me of over around Glenwood Springs. It was a 2-lane highway, paved, and it was a hill going up this way, and it was in April. The vegetation was all leafed out, and then you dropped down about 300 or 400 feet, and there was a river down below, a lot like Glenwood Springs. And we were going along, and I was in the third jeep, and all of a sudden, pop, 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 pop. And before you could say anything, the lieutenant and his driver were killed. In the second jeep, Sergeant Hootie was killed, but his driver was wounded. And in the third jeep, what happened when they started shooting, we stopped, we jumped out of our jeeps, and we got on the far side. The hill was up here, and that's where the sniper was, so we got behind the jeeps. And they managed to get the lieutenant and sergeant. 3 of us killed. Myself, how I got wounded, as I jumped behind the jeep, you know how wheels round? The only part of me that was sticking out was this part of my foot. And a stray bullet hit and went right in through here and went down and came out the bottom of my foot. And I didn't even know it. I couldn't feel it. It's ironic that the only one of the 6 that didn't get a scratch was my driver, who was a brand new recruit that was only 130 days out of civilian life. And he didn't get a scratch.
Well, where'd they get you?
Well, anyhow, I told you, we jumped out on behind the Jeep and the wheels round, and I didn't realize it. There was about this much of my foot sticking out, and a stray bullet just happened to go through my foot. And I've been drawing a disability compensation for all these years for that. Oh, I want to make a comment. Do you know who I think the bravest soldiers were? Our company medic. Those guys bear no weapons. Somebody wounded, they're right out there under fire. Our medic was killed.
But they sent you home then?
Yeah, I was flown out of Germany in a C-47 to a hospital in Scotland. I spent about, several weeks to a month there. The Scottish nurses were lovely. They were so good to us. And I came home on a C-54. I didn't get to see much because I was on a hospital stretcher, and I could look out the porthole and see water, and that's about it.
How close to the end of the war did all this happen?
April 1945. Just a couple months later, the war was over. I would have been coming home on points anyhow within about 2 months. I just made it home about 2 months early. And I want to throw in a word of commendation for the Veterans Administration. I've been hearing a lot of criticism lately, at least I read in the papers, but my experience with the VA was when I got home, I was not only treated well, I got out of the Army on August 20th, 1945. September 1st, I got my first check for those 10 days. Now that's efficiency you don't see in government these days. My treatment with the VA has been superb. Of course, I haven't had to go to the VA hospital or anything, but yes, I have. I've gone a couple times.
You were talked about that you earned 6 stripes as a corporal.
No, I made corporal 3 times.
Yeah. But explain why you made
Well,
corporal 3 times.
All right. The first one.
Hold on just a second. I'll wait till you get to, if you
Yeah.
can take a break here for a second.
Well,
Yeah, we can stop.
I got a little emotional there for a
We
minute.
have plenty of time.
The first time I made corporals, I told you my company commander in the replacement training center told me, he says, I think you're officer material. And so he sent my name in to go to Fort Benning Officer Candidate School. And so after my 6 weeks basic training, I went to a school for 3 weeks called Colonel McGowan School for Boys. Lieutenant Colonel McGowan ran a pre-OCS school for those that were going to go to Benning for Officer Candidate School. And it was to prepare you for it. Well, I went through the pre-OCS school just fine. And at the completion of the pre-OCS school, you were to be given your corporal stripes because everybody that went to Fort Benning had to be at least a corporal. So I was promoted to corporal. And the supply sergeant gave me a pair of corporal stripes, and he says, now you can't sew these on until you actually get on the train tomorrow on your way to Benning. So I had the corporal stripes in my hand overnight, but I didn't sew them on. Next morning, the first sergeant came in and he said, I got sort of bad news for you. He said, some medical officer up at battalion headquarters said that you're not physically fit to be an officer. You can stay on as a private, but no. So I never even got to put the first set of stripes on. The second time, when I was at Camp Forest in Tennessee, I made corporal again. No, that's not when it happened. We were at Fort Dix at the Port of Embarkation, and I made corporal a second time, but unfortunately I had just gotten married, and my wife was living in New York City, and I was at Trenton, New Jersey, and the colonel was very good. He said, if you have any relatives near Fort Dix, he says, you can be off at 5 o'clock. Just be sure you're back by reveille in the morning. And that went on fine for a couple of weeks. Unfortunately, the last day, when they were starting to load up on the Queen Mary, I sort of accidentally overstayed my leave by about 4 days, and when I got back, I was persona non grata. But the last time I made corporal was Model T corporal radio operator when I got into combat.
And it stuck.
Yeah, the last time they let me keep it.
As a radio operator, you were talking about being out there as a scout. Did you actually radio back?
Yes, now I was trained to use Morse code. But can you imagine having a little, your key on a sort of a clamp to fit on your knee, riding along in a Jeep trying to send Morse code? We never used code, we used voice all the time. There was some encryption in voice messages. I mean, we had certain code words that meant certain. I should mention at least something I'm sort of proud of. Almost all of my experience with the military has been somehow in the intelligence field. Before I went into the Army, I worked as a civilian translator for the Army in the Office of Censorship in New Orleans. I translated in Spanish and Portuguese languages, incoming and outgoing mail. And then when I got into the Army, I was in a low level of intelligence, scouting really, but the platoon was called intelligence and reconnaissance.
Kind of describe your radio and describe what you went through carrying that around. And
Well, before we got the half track, or even when I had there were two kinds of patrols, foot patrols and motorized patrols. When I'd go on a foot patrol, it was at night, of course, and we'd have a map and a compass and a flashlight, and I've been on patrols as few as 5 men, and sometimes as many as 12 or 15. But it's quite a trick to be able to try to slither around in the underbrush carrying the radio, the SCR 300 is about as big as my big black briefcase over there that you see. I mean, it's a big damn thing on your shoulder. But that didn't last too long. Before you know it, I think we were moving so fast that we weren't marching, we were moving in vehicles, that I got my radio in a Jeep first and then later the half track. All right, this is about how it fit. About here. A little lower on my back. Of course, there's shoulder straps, you know. But you know, slithering along through the underbrush carrying one of these things in your back wasn't the most comfortable way to get around.
You mentioned it was almost protection at times.
Well, if somebody tried to shoot me in the back, it would have protected me. I don't think it ever happened, but it would have been a protection, if somebody had been behind me and shooting at me.
How much did it weigh?
I'm guessing maybe around 30 pounds. It was heavy. But when we were, of course, there were times when we couldn't use a damn radio. There were some times we'd go out on a night patrol. I wouldn't take a radio because it was too bulky. It'd give away our position and that of the squad, and sometimes I wouldn't use it. But we mostly used it when we were moving from one place to another.
How far out when you were scouting? How far would you go out ahead of the main troop?
Oh, I'd say the furthest distance I ever was maybe 20 miles.
How did you get interested in language?
Oh, I think my mother told me about a grandfather of hers that was a scholar and knew 3 classical languages: classical Latin, classical Greek, and classical Hebrew, and 4 modern languages. And I guess the fact that I grew up in Trinidad on the playground, we had half Hispanic speaking kids. Well, all of us kids picked up a common Spanglish. I mean, sometimes we'd mix up Spanish and English words all in one sentence. But languages come easy to me. I have a good ear for it. I can imitate the sounds of almost any language. The only 2, and they have one similar sound that is impossible. That's the Welsh language and Greek. They have a similar sound. Have you seen the names like Lloyd and Llewellyn? All right, that double L in Welsh, I know how to say it, but I can't always do it. You form your mouth as if you're going to say L, like la 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 la, and then when you say Llewellyn, you go Llwan, and you exhale along with the L. It's Llwa. I can't do it exactly right. That is difficult.
But otherwise, you pick up languages.
Yeah, I pick them up very easily. I picked up Cajun French when I lived in New Orleans. I picked up enough German. Oh, I was going to tell you the story about German. Um, we were not as brutal as the Germans. However, when we took a German village, we would call everybody into the town square, only we didn't put them there to shoot them. I was the only one that could speak any German at all. And I had my favorite little speech. Oh, what gentlemen we soldiers were. Achtung, Achtung, Sie haben 10 Minuten für Ausgehen in euer Haus. Raus! Attention, you have. Oh, no. Achtung, Achtung, Sie haben 10 Minuten für Ausgehen in euer Haus. Sie kann euer Kleidung und Essen haben nicht mehr. Raus! Now, what I said was, attention, you have 10 minutes to get out of your house. You may take your food and clothing, nothing else. Move it. And they did. And the reason we did that was if we didn't empty the houses, there would be snipers inside. So if we had all the civilians, we didn't want to hurt them. If we had them out of their houses, then we could search the houses, and if there was any doubt, we just opened up with machine guns and submachines, and we had Tommy guns, and clear them. It sounds harsh in a way, but we were not brutal to the civilians like the Germans were. But war is war. What?
You had to be safe.
Yes, we had to secure the perimeter.
Did you find many Germans that way?
Really, no. they had sense enough to. I think they learned quickly that they better get out ahead of time.
As you were moving across Germany, were you running into much resistance? Obviously, you had the problem at Fulda where you ran into the snipers. Did you run into that a lot?
No, our biggest problem was at certain fixed points where they elected to stand and fight. But the Germans are brilliant militarists. They really are. They were damn good soldiers. And they knew how to fall back. They would get their main body out and they'd leave behind a rear guard to hold us up. But they knew how to hold us up just long enough and then get out before we could bring artillery in to bear on it. They're good soldiers.
Okay.
But the funny thing about Germany, once we got into a German village, surprisingly, there wasn't not a single Nazi there. Their favorite, wir bin nicht Partei. Oh, we were never a member of the party. No, not us.
How were you received by the German people overall?
Believe it or not, they acted glad to see us. They're not dumb. They've been having wars for 1,000 years. And before Germany was united in 1871 under Bismarck, there must have been 40 or 50, maybe as many as 100 little principalities and dukedoms and counties in Germany. And they were so used to their lord changing, you know. Count Rudolph here would be beaten by Duke Helmut, that the people just took as a matter of fact, whoever was the lord, they changed religions that way, which leads you to believe that most of their religiosity is for show.
Shot him or captured him?
Probably we shot him. They didn't. There was a point there where they didn't have the facilities to handle prisoners, so they were just shooting them.
Actually, I think one of the people we talked to might have been the same guy. Alluded to that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so.
Well, they were desperate. They knew they were losing, and you got to give them credit. They didn't give up. I admire their tenacity.
Okay. One other question while we're still in Germany here. You talked about entering a concentration camp. And can you describe how that happened?
Well, because we got there faster than the Germans expected, the SS, who were running the concentration camp, they got out and they just left the survivors there. And that was the most horrifying sight I've ever seen. I mean, there were men that maybe weighed 60 pounds. They just were starved. That's the only one I ever saw.
What was the camp?
I don't remember the name of it. I don't think it was one of the major ones. It was somewhere in well, I think it was in Bavaria, but I don't really remember.
Were the Americans able to help these people at all?
Oh, sure. Listen, we had our medics in there right away, getting them to the point where they could even eat solid food. No, we were very good to the civilians. And the German people were surprised that when we came in that we didn't act like the Russians. They were scared to death of the Russians. The Russians are the scum of the earth. I mean, the Russian soldiers, they were just, a lot of them were Orientals, Tartars, and they have a different set of values from what we have.
In the prison camp, do you have any idea how many people were in there? Was it a prison camp or was it just a
It was, it was a concentration camp, a small one. I don't know. They may have had 500 people there. It was, I suppose you might call it a satellite camp. What else?
What?
I was going to say one other question I had, just kind of along that line, was the fact that you talked about that you would go into the towns and make the announcement to the German civilians. Did you do that in the area where the concentration camp was? And did you have any of the civilians go through?
Well, there was only one town I ever went in that had this little small concentration camp, and that was at the end of the war for me. Um I'm not sure I know how to answer that question. Uh,
Did you take any of the civilians through to show them what had been going on?
no, no. For one thing, we didn't stay in one place very long. We'd go through a town, we might spend the night there. We, we, we moved pretty fast. Patton didn't believe in having soldiers sit around doing nothing. I can't say enough in praise of General Patton. Not everybody agreed with that.
Were most of the troops, did they mostly feel the way you did?
I think so. I know everybody that I knew did. Because we were winning. Troops like a winning general. When a general starts to lose battles, he loses his glamour.
And he loses his troops too.
Well, the problem with the 1st, 5th, and 7th Armies, General Hatch was one general, I can't remember the other generals, was maybe it was the mission they were given, but we figured they and the British were too cautious. The big joke we had in Normandy was when we landed at St. Mary-Glise, the British were dug in at a town called Caen, C-A-E-N. By the time we were all the way across France and into Luxembourg, the British were still dug in at Caen. General Montgomery was too cautious. He was afraid that his reputation would suffer if there were too many body bags going back home to England. You know, I don't know if I'd want to be a general because you can't think about, you can think about casualties, but you have to be proportional about it. You don't win ground without losing some lives. Now, probably the toughest part in Normandy were the hedgerows. And I don't know how deep they were, but it seemed like forever. And the French farmers over the centuries had built up these hedges like fences. And over the centuries, they'd gotten thick and high. And we used to use a tank with a bulldozer blade on it to just chop through a hedgerow. And then as soon as we got some troops through, of course, there were snipers from all over shooting at us. So hedgerows were very difficult.
They gave a lot of cover to the snipers.
Yes, yes. There was one story I wanted to tell you. One time, while we were moving, we captured a German pillbox. Well, they sent me up into the pillbox because it was on high ground, and I could run an antenna out the porthole or the slots. Unfortunately, while I was up there, the Germans counterattacked, and I got sort of isolated up there in that pillbox. And for whatever reason, the Germans didn't try to take the pillbox back, and they didn't even know I was there. And I was able to look down on a highway, and I saw a convoy of German ambulances coming along. And something told me that I didn't think they were carrying patients in that convoy. And so I was doing artillery observation up there. So I figured, what the heck, we're there to kill Germans. If they're wounded soldiers, that's too bad, but I don't think they are. I called down an artillery strike. One artillery shell hit one of the ambulances, and the whole bunch of them exploded. They were carrying munitions. So I called down. There was about, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 ambulances, all loaded with munitions, because they figured they could get them through, you know.
How long were you isolated up there in the pillbox?
I don't know, a couple days. There was one time when somebody started shelling it, and of course I was perfectly safe in there, but the concussion was terrible.
Who was shooting at it?
I don't know. You can't tell when a shell comes in. It's pretty hard to tell.
How'd you feel isolated up there? What kind of a feeling was it?
Well, at first I didn't like it, and then I got used to it. You have to understand something about a combat soldier. Once you've been shot at a few times, you get used to the idea. And when you're out across ordinary ground, maybe you wouldn't be surprised at what a motivation for digging a foxhole in a hurry bullets coming at you are. We had an entrenching tool that we carried on our pack. And with just that little entrenching tool, we got so that we could dig a foxhole in no time flat. Whoever invented the foxhole, he had a good idea. I can tell you this, that I was in combat for about 11 months, and 95% of the time was dull and boring. You're not shooting at the enemy or being shot at all the time. Most of the time we were moving from one place to another. Oh, I would like to comment that I think the supplies that we got, even up at the front, we were probably the best supplied army in history. Thanksgiving Day in France, we had hot turkey and dressing and cranberry sauce, all the goodies. What they did, they'd bring the hot food up to company or battalion headquarters, and a third of us at a time would go back, have an hour or so to enjoy a good hot meal, and then go back and somebody else would. I think we were well fed and well supplied, and that's a tragedy in some of these wars since, where they don't have very good quartermasters, or there's some fault in the command structure where they're not supplying people well. That was one of the geniuses of Napoleon. Napoleon believed that if he kept his troops well fed and well supplied with munitions, they would fight like hell, and they did. Julius Caesar was the first one in the Western world to really understand supply. Do you know that the Roman soldiers, and they were the greatest marchers, they were infantry. Every one of them had a little leather bag, fairly good size, they carried on the pouch, and in that was wheat. And the reason Caesar was able to move such distances was that when his troops were moving, they could munch on wheat as they're marching, so they didn't have to stop for meals. It was the original K-ration. But that was one of the geniuses of Julius Caesar. Do you know why the German Kaiser was called Kaiser and why the Russian Tsar was called Tsar? Adaptations of the word Caesar. Because don't forget, in Latin, C-A-E-S-A-R is pronounced Caesar. We say Caesar, but the C is hard in Latin. It's Kaiser. And so the Kaiser, the German Kaiser, and Tsar is just a Russian adaptation of Kaiser.
We need to take him into the schools.
Yes. Where were you first for VE Day and then for VJ Day? And
Oh, I was home already. VE Day. Let's see. I was discharged August 20th, and by September 1st, my home was in. I went to California, and I was in a Los Angeles suburb on VE Day. I don't really remember anything special. And VJ Day, I didn't pay any attention to that. I was out the civilian by then. I was more interested in getting out of uniform. I wish I'd kept it. But I couldn't wait to get out of uniform and get into civilian clothes. Well, my first wife was one of the original Navy waves. Um, she went to Hunter College in New York City, and she enlisted in the waves at Hunter College. And she was a storekeeper, third class. In the Navy, that's about the equivalent of a buck sergeant in the Army. So when I met her, she outranked me. And I met her at the USO in New Orleans. And the reason we went to California was her folks lived in New York. My father lived in my hometown in Trinidad, and my mother was in New Orleans. I had the idea the best thing for newlyweds was to get as far away from any in-laws as possible. We just looked at a map, and Los Angeles seemed about as far away from anybody as we could find. That's how I ended up in California. And of course, within a year, her family and my mother moved out there. My dad stayed in Trinidad. And I went to school in California. Uh, Venice Adult Evening High School and 2 years at Santa Monica City College. And then I got lonesome and came back home to Denver and finished at Denver University.
You're in Los Angeles. You just kind of come back to Denver. And when was that?
1950. I lived out in Los Angeles from 1945 to 1950. And I got homesick, and so my first wife agreed. We came back here to Denver. Well, and in fact, she also went to Santa Monica City College while I was going, but she was a semester behind me. So I did one semester at UCLA, which I like to forget, while she finished Santa Monica. When I say that about UCLA, it's a wonderful university. And the professors were outstanding. The only complaint I had was the classes were 500 to 700. And that's not a good learning experience because they relied solely on the lecture method. And if you know anything about teaching, of all the methods of teaching there are, the lecture method is the poorest. I have the greatest of admiration for the Army, the military system of education. When they taught us, there'd be a short lecture, and then it was on-the-job training. We get a lecture, and then we go out and do it. They'd give maybe a 10-minute lecture on how to dig a foxhole, and then you'd go out there and you'd dig a foxhole. Another thing, they impressed upon us the importance of keeping our rear end down when we're crawling along. So we crawled along with full pack, rifle and bayonet, like this on your elbows, with live machine gun fire just about 6 inches above you. And believe me, is that a motivation to keep your ass down? You damn right it is. But I think I think in some ways our training was better than the Germans. They're more disciplined than we were. But the German soldier was not trained to use individual initiative as much as the Americans. We were great improvisers.
What about family? When did you have your family?
Well, my first child, my oldest daughter, was born when I was in France. I'd been in France 6 months when she was born. And she was one who was born on Thanksgiving Day. And then when I came home, my second daughter appeared miraculously about 9 months after I got home. And then we had decided to space our kids 2 years apart. Then my first wife became an elementary school teacher, and unfortunately, she contracted rubella. And then after I got out of the Army and came back home and went to college on the GI Bill, I wanted to be a lawyer, but I didn't have enough GI time to do that. So as an alternative profession, I chose teaching, and I love teaching. So when I finished at Denver University, I got a job with the Air Force Intelligence School out at Lowry, and I was a civilian instructor in the intelligence department at Lowry Air Force Base for 3 years. And then when they moved it out, I didn't want to go to Wichita Falls, Texas, so that's when I went to law school. I paid my own way through law school. By then, there was no GI Bill. I sold insurance.
What did you do with your law degree then?
Well, I starved the first 6 months. You're supposed to do that. And then a friend of mine told me about an opening in the Denver City Attorney's office. I went over there, and they just happened to have an opening the day I walked in, and I was hired on the spot. And I spent the rest of my professional life as an assistant city attorney for the city and county of Denver. I was also deputized as a deputy district attorney, and there's a technical reason for that. In those days, it may still be true, when a cop would write a ticket for somebody, let's say that somebody was speeding and driving recklessly and carelessly and ran 10 stoplights and so on. Those are all city municipal charges. But what if also he was driving a stolen car and didn't have title to the car, and his driver's license was issued by the state, driving without, those are state charges. Well, in theory, in those days, in fact, they did it for a while, they would decide whether they would prosecute this in a state court or a city court. Now, the courts were the same. All the county courts, originally they were justice of the peace courts and then county courts, they would be written on one ticket. They would prosecute all the city charges and then have to bring in a deputy district attorney to prosecute the no driver's license and the state charges. Well, that got to be sort of awkward. So Bert Keating, the district attorney at the time, and Max Zoll, the city attorney, entered into an agreement. We were cross-deputized, so that's how I became a deputy district attorney. So that on the same ticket, as a district attorney, I could prosecute no driver's license, no title, and so on, along with the speeding and that. So that's how I got the title of deputy district attorney. I was an assistant attorney general under the great Duke W. Dunbar for about 6 months. I was assigned with 2 other attorneys to what was called the Legislative Reference Office. And that was a division of the Attorney General's office. We were assigned to the legislature. We had a little office up there at the Capitol building. And most people don't understand how laws are drafted. Even a state senator or a representative, he may be a lawyer himself, and his constituent wants him to draft a bill to stop prairie dogs from barking, as an example. Well, all legislators are going to keep their constituents happy. And so he's not going to draft that himself. All the people in the Legislative Reference Office do, that's all we do is draft bills. So they'll come up and give us a slip of paper and say, we need something to stop these prairie dogs from barking. And so it was our job to draft something. I don't care how silly it was, we'd find some way to draft something. Of course, once we drafted it, the legislature had kept his commitment to his constituent, and it could go to committee and get killed right away. That's all right. That's how politics works.
How did you do with that prairie dog barking bill?
Well, drafted and it went to committee and got killed. But I did have a pet bill of my own that I wanted, that I got. Senator Ruth Stockton from Jefferson County was a close political ally of mine and a wonderful lady. And I was a citizens band radio enthusiast. And I noticed that ham radio operators got a special license plate with their call letters on it. So I said to Ruth, I said, how can I'd like something to authorize this for CB operators. And we had citizens band operator clubs. And the one in Jefferson County was very powerful. We had a lot of members. And we all voted for Ruth Stockton, and she knew it. So she asked me to draw up a bill to grant special license plates to citizens band operators. The bill died in committee, and the reason was there were too many digits in the CB call signs. The ham operators had no more than 5. We had as many as 7. Well, let me see. My call letters were KGB 0068, KGB 0068. That was one letter too many for specialized plates, so it never got anywhere.
When did you come to Broomfield?
Oh, about 6 years ago. My present wife, she's a native Californian, and 2 years successively previous to that, we'd come out for vacation to Colorado. And quite honestly, she fell in love with the place. I did not pressure her to come to Colorado. She liked it, and since she's gotten here, you'd think she's a member of the local Chamber of Commerce. She loves it here. Well, she has no relatives anymore in California. She has one sibling, a brother who lives half his time in Wisconsin, the other half in Sun City, Arizona. He's a snowbird. And
so Broomfield is a relatively new experience for you.
yes, all I knew about Broomfield when I was growing up, before the turnpike was built, it was a wide spot in the road with a grocery store and a gas station and 3 or 4 farmhouses. But, well, what happened was, when we came back here to Colorado, we lived in an apartment in Westminster for about 4 months while we were looking for a house to buy. We'd sold our house in California, and we saw an ad in the paper for sale by owner, and we came out here and we talked to the lady that was an owner. It had belonged to her father, and he had died, and there were 4 daughters, and she was the daughter that was elected to be the agent. And so my wife and I liked it, and she's a lovely woman. We're still friends with her. She said, "Well, what do you think it's worth? What will you offer?" And we had looked around a little bit, and I said, "Well, we'll offer $133,500." And I wrote up a contract. As you know, I'm a retired lawyer. So I wrote the contract myself. I didn't have to pay anybody to do that. And in it, I put the price of $134,500 or VA appraisal, whichever is lower. The VA appraisal came back $500 more than we had offered, so that was it. So I have a 100% GI loan on the house here, and we just love it here.
What do you think about what's happening in Broomfield? All the growth?
I'm glad we're becoming a home rule city and county, very much so. And we have room for expansion. The Broomfield city limits now include an awful lot of open farmland that can be used for expansion. I think it was a good thing we got broadlands in. And let's face it, Broomfield, because of the demographics, because of the type of people who live here, and they almost all of them are either retirees like my wife and myself here in Gayton Green, or in Broomfield in generally, they're people that are working in high-tech industries. They all make very good money. You see all these big homes, they can't build them fast enough. We paid $134,500 for this house. We just got back our valuation from the county assessor of Boulder County. It's assessed now at 175, and we could sell it for 200 easy if we wanted to. Of course, we don't. My wife and I, at this stage in our life, I'm 80, and my wife is just barely turned 70. She's 10 years younger than I am. We don't ever plan to leave here. I mean, we're comfortable here. With her retirement and mine, hers is twice what mine is, but we have a comfortable, fixed income that's adequate for our every need. We're not extravagant. I make a little bit of money. I think I've made $500 so far this year. I teach Spanish to the seniors up at the Louisville Senior Center. Every Monday I go up there for 2 hours, and I make about $40 for that.
On the new city and county, do you think this was really an innovation for the state to have a new county?
Well, obviously, by definition, it was something new. That's what innovation means. There were people who opposed it here in Broomfield because they didn't understand it. A large number of people will be opposed to any kind of change. I don't care what it is. But I think the idea of Broomfield being in 4 different counties, which it was, Jefferson, Boulder, is it Arapahoe, and a little sliver of Weld County. Adams, and a sliver of Weld County. And the transition is coming along very nicely, I think. It's a lot better to be able to go down here to City Hall in Broomfield, and if you want to get a marriage license or a real estate transfer, instead of having to go to Brighton or I don't even know the county seat of Weld County, but it's a long ways away. I think altogether, plus, from my own experience as an assistant city and county attorney in Denver for all those years, looking at it, it seems to me that of the functions of the new home rule city and county, Broomfield's already a home rule city. The amount of peculiarly county functions that will be added, maybe 10% of the total governmental structure. So we're not adding a great deal. And actually we're not adding, we're replacing. We are replacing the county clerks of the 4 counties I mentioned. So we'll have one right here at home. There'll be some growing pains. But I think it's fortunate that Broomfield has the economic base to be able to afford what we're doing. I think we'll actually, in the long run, save money. I think they're doing a good job from what little I've read.
Okay.
I don't know too much about it, but from what I've read, they don't seem to be going off on any wild tangents. The only thing that worries me is if we get a bunch of New Deal type do-gooders in there that say, gee, look at all this money we have, let's spend it. and go into a whole lot of social services that I think should not be the function of government. As a libertarian, I believe in the necessary. There are certain governmental functions that cannot be performed by anything but government. We need a governmentally run police department, fire department, probably health department, and I would say a parks and recreations department and things like that. But the Libertarian Party's platform and my personal belief is that whenever we're faced with a problem, if a given problem can be handled equally well by government and private enterprise, I opt for the private sector. And I would reduce government to the purely governmental essentials: police, fire, health. I believe parks and recreation, although there have been privately sponsored parks in some areas of the country. But all the social welfare that eats up so much tax money, I believe government should get out of about 90% of it. I believe in helping people who are physically or mentally handicapped, unable to take care of themselves. I don't want people starving in the street. But beyond that, so many of the social services, especially the Democrats and New Dealers, have gone into, um, that's where I do agree with President Bush in many respects, that I think that they should revert back to the private sector. And if the private sector doesn't want to do it, well, then it won't be done. But I don't think that the political entity, the polity, I don't believe that it owes, I don't believe that society as a whole, the taxpayers, owe social welfare from cradle to grave. I just don't. I'm more of the believer in survival of the fittest. You know, if you can't get a job here, if you can't survive, go back to Chihuahua or go back to Detroit. If you can't make it here, maybe this isn't the place where you should live. Just because you might want to live here, if you can't survive, I don't think we have an opportunity to make up for your deficiencies. My Libertarian Party here in Broomfield is so tiny. If we had enough members, we were planning on having a member sit in on every city council meeting to report back the good things they did, yes. But when they started putting the government into areas that I think should be left free from government interference, I wish we had enough members so that we could go down and report on it. From what I've read in the paper, I haven't really seen anything bad going on in the city of Broomfield. I'm not aware of any. Yeah, I'm a little upset about the policy of some concerning prairie dogs. I object to them being poisoned. Uh, you know, if it interferes with horseback riding, let them take their horses and go to a riding range where there are no prairie dog holes. But I'm on the side of the prairie dogs. My wife and I are quite tender-hearted toward animal life. Now, people say, well, you did some great things. One thing that needs to be remembered, there were 16.5 million of us wearing a uniform, mostly Army, but second largest group was probably Air Force, and then the Navy and Marines. But looking back over history, I would say that the significant aspect of World War II is that's a war where the soldier, the combat soldier, knew that the entire country was behind him. I have a half brother, 20 years younger than I am. He served in the Marines. He was at Beirut and all those good things. Not a great big deal. It was a big deal if you're being shot at, but I mean, it wasn't a big deal in scheme of history of warfare. Then Vietnam, well, then Korea occurred. The soldiers in Korea did not have the national backing that the World War II soldiers did. And I think each war since, it's gone down till we get to Desert Storm. And I think the way that veterans of the most recent veterans are being treated is a disgrace. These guys went over there. I think our generals did a great job, but the damn politicians wouldn't let them finish it. We should have been able to go through and capture and execute Saddam Hussein. And it was the same thing in World War II. Everybody says, well, you know, war is terrible. We ought to get rid of all the armed forces. I don't believe that at all. War is terrible. But I believe in what Teddy Roosevelt said. Speak softly and carry a big stick. I'm very much, I think it's a disgrace the way Clinton emasculated the military. I don't agree with everything President Bush is doing, but at least he's trying to build the military back up again. And I think that one of the mistakes that occurred during the Clinton years was Clinton was so narcissistic, he just wanted everybody to love him. And so he ran all over the world wanting to be the big hero. I don't think we should have been at Kosovo. I myself think that we should withdraw our troops from everywhere in the world except detachments to defend our embassies. And I believe we should defend the Western Hemisphere. I believe we should have strong alliances. We do with Canada, and we're developing them with Mexico. And I just think that we should let Europe solve its own messes. I sound like an American firster from the 1930s, but I really believe that. I just don't think we should be off putting out all these brush fires. Let the Balkans, they've been doing this for 2,000 years, killing each other. And you know that the Mohammedans and the Roman Catholics and the Greek Orthodox in Yugoslavia, they're never going to want anything except to kill each other. Well, let them go. We're not going to solve anything by being there. And I don't think we should. Oh, I do feel strongly. In fact, I'll proclaim this right now. I have initiated on the web a boycott of everything made in Red China. And one of my favorite little ploys is to go into some place like Target or Kmart, and my wife won't go with me when we do this. She doesn't want anybody to know that she's married to me. I go around and I pick up a couple dozen items that say made in China. And I go up and I put them on the counter, and I stop before the girl can ring up the first one. I'll look with great astonishment with a line of people behind me. Do you realize these things are made by slave labor in Red China? How can you as a good American support these communist Chinese? No, I won't buy it. Leave it there. She doesn't like to be with me when I do that. I don't understand why.